Welcome to Christians Living in the Real World, episode 9. Hey guys, I'm telling you, I have had such great feedback from the interviews I've been doing, and I guess I'm just blessed to know so many interesting people, people that are a lot smarter than me. And today is no exception. We have a special guest, Jake Kirchner, author, speaker, teacher, pastor, just a tremendous man, and such a blessing in my life. And we're going to learn a lot from him today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to explain all of his journey to get to this conversation. I'm going to let him do that. But I will, with no further ado, introduce Jake Kirchner. Jake, introduce yourself. Let the people know, all of you,
Hey,
like all the stuff.
hey, all the stuff. Well, you're gonna get a lot of stuff, I think, about me. So grateful that you're having me on. Thank you so much, Jenny. Yeah, it's an interesting journey that I've been on over the past couple of years. One that sometimes it's kind of depends where to start, but I think the best place for me to start is going back 3 years ago on this journey that I've been on. That one day I walked into the office. You mentioned I was a pastor, and I was working at a church just over 3 years ago now, and I've been really struggling with anxiety, and that was new for me. I hadn't really felt like anxiety was something present in my life. I've been doing ministry for 20 years as a youth pastor, as a teaching pastor, done lots of speaking, things that would normally give people some sort of anxiety, and I didn't really have those feelings before. And one night I'd woken up and felt this just incredible kind of pain, both in my chest and just all over my body, and went, "What is going on?" And realized, oh, this is like the beginning of a panic attack. And it was horrible. It lasted only a few minutes. And I know people who their panic attacks last much longer. And I thought, God, literally, I was praying, God, I can't do this. This isn't okay. That was the beginning of my anxiety, that I was starting to feel and going, oh, there's stuff going on. And so through conversations with people, realized, hey, I gotta start talking this out. I gotta talk to a counselor, figure out what's going on with me. Never had another one of those panic attacks. But you fast forward from that first kind of feel of anxiety to, as I mentioned, about 3 years ago, I was walking in church, walking in my office, and I could feel in my chest the place that I would feel anxiety often, just in my rib cage, and I would feel it, and I go, man, something's going on. Okay,
Well,
and I literally
can
walked.
I just jump in there,
Yeah,
because it's so funny you
yeah,
say that, Jake, because in my coaching practice, that's what we talk about. Like, our thoughts are in our head, but
mm,
there's a reason they
mm,
call them feelings, right? We
mm,
literally
mm,
feel it in our body. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And for me, I was starting to come to the understanding that this anxiety is trying to teach me something. It's trying to tell me something. It's a symptom of something bigger. And I was exploring that, trying to figure it out. And this particular day, I went into my office, and I had a great friend and colleague who knew I was kind of struggling through this. And I sat down and I reached for my rib cage,
Mm,
and I could just see in her face, she was like, oh, it's still happening, huh? Like, because she knew I was trying to work on it. And
mm-hmm.
I said, yeah, yeah. And I kind of started sharing some of the things I was wrestling through. I had taken a couple of weeks off, tried to do some self-care stuff, like, okay, I got to get better sleep. I got to I'll drink less caffeine. I'm going to do this. And I had all these self-care things I was doing. And yet it was still persistent.
Mm.
And I thought maybe it would go away with all the things I was doing, and it wasn't. And so when I walked in, she kind of knew, like, oh, something's going on. I had taken about a 3 week break from you call like a little mini sabbatical to kind of get things straight
Sure.
in my head. And so when she saw that, she had that kind of wide look in her eyes, and I started explaining things. And I don't know if I had thought this before the conversation or if it just came up impromptu, but I said, I just feel like it's so soul constricting. And that
Mm.
word, soul constricting, all of a sudden, like, I went, oh, this isn't just, I wasn't just feeling it in my body. I was feeling it in multiple places, and it wasn't making sense. And so that led me to start writing down those symptoms, start researching those symptoms. And, Google's not the place to get diagnosed with anything, probably,
Right.
because you get, but everything kept pointing to and showing, all the things I was looking at burnout kept coming up, burnout, burnout, burnout. And I was
Uh,
like, well, I don't have burnout. Burnout's not what I have. I love what I do. I'm called to this. This is what I feel like I'm supposed to be doing. I'm around great people. This place that I was working, this church I was at the time, had values and vision that I was excited about. My role felt like a good fit. So all those things like seemed like they should have been in alignment. So I'm going, that can't be burnout. And the other side was I was like, well, I'm not overworking. It's not that I'm working too many hours or exhausting myself, but I'm exhausted. I don't get it. And so that led me down this journey of both reflection and research. I started going, okay, I'll read that article. And I wasn't just reading like pop psychology articles. I was reading like Journal of Medicine articles, like stuff that most people kind of go, that was boring read. I was going, no, I got to figure this thing out. And so through that process, I realized, okay, this is real. This thing I'm going through, I think it is burnout. And that wasn't the best word to always use with people because I think it's so misunderstood, and it comes with stigma. It comes with lots of other things.
Say more about that. What do you think the assumptions are behind that word?
Yeah, well, the assumption is for some people is, oh, you don't have good boundaries and you're working too hard, and you're putting too much into this role. Another assumption I think people have, some of the stigma is a little bit of the you don't have your act together, right? You just can't seem to figure it out. At least that's the stigma I was thinking in my head. That was some of the negative thoughts I was putting in there. I think there's a little bit of a stigma too of like the thought becomes if you can work hard enough to figure it out on your own, right? You can tweak some things and check get these things in line and you'll get through burnout. One of the other stigmas I felt like, especially in a church, was, well, you must not have enough faith. Right. If you just had some more faith, if you just trusted Jesus with this more, especially when I'm talking about my anxiety, you can just kind of see some people going, is there something you're not surrendering?
Probably some real well-meaning people. Now, Jake, if you just had a little more faith.
Yeah. And so, and that even that fear of having people maybe think that, because I could see it, hear it from a couple people, was like, okay, well, don't talk about it. There's only certain people you could talk about these things with. Just put your head down, try to work through it, which is part of what had gotten me to that spot. Was I had been feeling these things for a while. I thought, well, I'll just push through it. I'll power through it. I'll grind it out. I'll, pull yourself by the bootstraps kind of thing. You can do it. And that was clearly not working.
I have to say, I'm even wired that way. But I know there's a lot of pressure, particularly on men, is the head of your household. And so, you don't get a lot of leeway culturally and socially for you to be like, no, this is real, and you do, you put on those boots every day and just push.
Yeah. Push through it, get through it, figure it out, and, I'm grateful and blessed that I have a wife that I could talk through some of these things with. And we came to a conclusion together. Actually, I just saw it in my journal the other day that I had written about it, that she had left for work one day and had seen the sunrise coming up on the way to work. And it just made her, she really felt and sensed from God, like Jake needs a break. He needs to take a break from this. And that in some ways was a little bit of the confirmation I needed, like it was going to be okay. Right. And really, when you talk about having faith, it took a lot more faith for me to step away from ministry than it did trying to stick it out.
I'm sure.
And so because of some of the things you just mentioned. And so,
well, and so particularly if I might ask the question, I mean, particularly in ministry, because there comes a whole nother flood of thoughts of, this is my calling. Why would I have to step away from it? Is this what, this is what God wants me to do? Am I incorrect on that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. You're totally right. And that was the piece that started some of my deeper reflection and deeper digging was it didn't make sense to me. Wait a second, I'm called to this. Aren't I called to this? This is the thing I'm supposed to be doing. Was I wrong? Did I misunderstand something? Right. Am I missing something? And like, hey, if I step away from ministry, what are people going to think? That there's all sorts of assumptions that are going to be made, and I got to be okay with people making wrong assumptions. And so that was all really hard. And then in the middle of the spring, I made the decision, and then by that end of May, I was I stepped away, and I really was like, I don't know if I'm going to come back to ministry as a full-time role professionally. And I was like, so what am I going to do? And during that time, what I created was margin that I didn't have. It did create a space for me to, the self-care practices were kind of there, but it created a space for me to start really exploring what's happening. Why is it happening? Why did I have some of the feelings I was having? What's the deeper thing happening behind it? And I really wanted to figure that out. And so I would journal, I would spend tons of time reflecting, I would read, and every once in a while I would just kind of come back to it. And the thing that was really driving me, the verse that I was kind of putting in front of God and saying, Jesus, okay, you promised that you said you came to give life and give it to us to the full. And I feel like I've not experienced that in a long time. Like, what happened? How did it go wrong? Especially as I was doing ministry.
Absolutely.
How does it feel so far away? And that curiosity, that question, would just come up time and time again in my journaling, come up time and time again in my prayer time, in my reflection time. And I would just write things out and say, well, maybe this was going on, or why did I do this? And that all just kind of sat in my journal for a long time. And I thought, well, I want to understand this, and I want to share with people more about this. And so I just put it there and had it. And then, you fast forward a little bit, COVID happens, all these kind of things happen.
Right.
And I had an opportunity to say yes to a position at my kid's school to step in and be a part of their education. And I thought, well, I'll try that for now, see how that goes. And within the first couple of months, I started experiencing some of the very things that I had been working through for so long and had originally experienced when I had stepped away. And I thought, well, that's interesting. What's going on? And I did some more reflection and could then start to see a pattern. And then I looked around and saw teachers and staff members experiencing the same thing. And it just started kind of popping everywhere I would go. I'd go, well, that person's really not in a great spot. Oh, this is going on. This is going on.
Wow.
And so I went to the principal and I said, hey, what's happening right now in this program, it isn't fitting the way I thought it would. And that's a story we don't need to go into. But I said, I think what I can do and what I'd like to do is come on staff and help teachers who are dealing with burnout, because I think it's widespread. I think it's really big, and it's affecting not just teachers, it's affecting the whole school, it's affecting the whole community. People aren't showing up at their best and with the energy that they really need to help kids to show up for them. And she said, okay, let's figure it out. So that was a good step in a really interesting direction for me, because it wasn't what I had planned to do. And so I had to figure out what that job was going to look like. And through that process of, okay, how do I talk about this? How do I share this? How do I step into this to help other people not experience burnout? It made me realize, like, well, burnout, I hate this word, burnout. I really dislike it for some of the things I'd mentioned.
Right.
Sometimes it's overused. Sometimes it's used as a badge of honor. Some people say, oh, I burned out and I got back into it 2 weeks later. You're like, oh. And I was going, well, if you got back into it 2 weeks later, I'm not sure what you experienced was the same thing I experienced.
Right.
Not saying they didn't experience something
of course.
big and valid,
right?
But different, and not what I was seeing either. And so then I sat down. I was like, how do I talk about this and not use such a negative term? Because once you're in burnout, once the symptoms are there, it's almost like, it's not that it's too late, but it's a very different path out than the positive side of it. How do we have the energy? How do we have that engagement? And that led to this like thought, okay, what if we just called it vocational vitality? What does it look like for people to show up to meaningful work with the optimal energy, and really to show up giving our best selves to the things that we find meaningful?
Okay, so slow down for a second and go back. Vocational vitality. I wanted to make sure everybody caught that, because that's no small thing. That's no small thing. So keep going.
Vocational vitality. You think about what is a vocation. The way I think about it is a vocation is the work and roles that we have that go beyond, that have a greater meaning beyond just transaction. And then that vitality that's an energy word, right? It's a word that's prompting and promoting thriving.
Yes.
It's charging us towards life. It's life giving and life receiving. That's vitality. So you put those two things together, vocational vitality, that optimal energy that I can bring and give of myself to this work that I find meaningful.
That's awesome.
That changed the conversation to me to go, okay, there's a lot more we can control in that. There's a lot more we can grow in awareness of. We don't have to wait for things to happen, for these,
right.
for these symptoms to occur, for us to be like engaged with it and be proactive.
Well, and it's really the
that
difference between feeling victim to it, right, versus being able to take proactive steps.
Yeah, and that was a big learning for me during those couple of years that I had stepped away. Was I had really thought it was everybody else's fault, right? It was the system's fault. It was the institution. It was the profession. It was I wasn't given a chance to use my skill. It was everything else except, although there was a lot of self-judgment happening too. There was a lot of condemnation coming back at myself. So it is a little bit more cyclical than that. But I wanted somebody else to fix it when it was happening. Yes. And what I realized is, man, I could have been a part of the solution while it was happening. Had I had language for it, had I had a framework to talk about it, it would have brought clarity. Now, I may have needed to still step away from that role or step into something different. But the way I would have stepped into it, the energy I would have brought, the understanding that the people around me would have had, because I think most people didn't understand either what was going on. I think it shocked a lot of people because I could fake it really well. Like I've started to do ministry. I
we're
could
good
show
at that,
up
aren't
and
we?
fake it. Yeah. And I see that in a lot of my colleagues that have been doing teaching and education. That you just show up and you can put on the fake best self.
That's right.
If you're not bringing the energy that you need to. So, so and again,
process, if I could just jump in, just hearing your passion and knowing you now for how many years, you are the image of vocational vitality, because you're loving this. I mean, you're loving exploring what God has brought you to. You're loving dissecting it and figuring it out and helping other people through that. That is vocational vitality.
Yeah.
Real life, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. And I think when I started to realize that my purpose, and that's one of the three sources of energy that come with vitality. There's really three sources that we draw from. Purpose is one of them. I was really confused about purpose because I thought purpose was you're a pastor. That's your purpose, which is a really narrowed view of what purpose is. Or you're a communicator, you're a speaker, you are a teaching pastor. And so I would take a skill and make that my purpose. Or I take a passion and make that my purpose. Some people take a need and they make that their purpose. And really it's this unique combination of those three things: my skills and strengths, my passions that I have, and the needs that I can perceive around me. And if that's true, if that's what purpose is, my purpose is way more dynamic and way more, I don't want to say it's fluid, but it's dynamic. It is something that I have to kind of come back to and say, boy, the needs around me have changed. I can give myself to this thing, but if there's no need for it, it's eventually going to cause my vitality to take a hit.
Sure.
And when I talk about soul constricting, I like that idea of, I don't like the idea. I hated the idea. I hated the feeling, but this image of a constrictor kind of squeezing down on you. And what happens when well, I've never been squeezed by a snake, but if I imagine if it happened, what does happen is every time you take a breath, every time you breathe in and take another breath, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter.
Right.
And so it's one of the few things that shows us that sometimes the more you struggle, the less likely you are to survive. And so here's, the more that you just keep pushing. So this combination really made me realize, and you just brought it up, you said it exactly right. I go, oh, here's the skills, here's this passion, here's this need. Man, that just brings a ton of energy to me. And it's not far off from why I was doing what I was doing before.
Well, that's it.
I want to see the best of people. Yeah.
But God knows the need, right? And he's like, I'm sorry, you got to go through this, bud, but there's a big need out there. And you're going to have to, I trust you enough to walk with me through the pain of it to get to the other side so that we can fill
Yeah.
this need.
Yeah, totally. And even as you say that, I remember a conversation I had at least a full year before I went through it. Hey, burnout is going to be a tsunami in our culture. There's a tsunami of burnout coming. And I don't remember why I said it. I probably knew within me that I was starting to experience it.
Yeah.
But now you look at it and you see it. It's so many places, especially people who have a high sense of purpose, a high sense of calling.
Right.
People who are in the service industries, and yeah.
So let me ask you this. I mean, what would you say was the most difficult thing about going through that burnout?
Yeah. I think a couple of things that were happening. I think having seen my family have to watch me and not understand it, having seen my wife try to be like, I wish I could help you.
Right.
Knowing that it was affecting the people around me. Again, that sometimes the symptoms are the things that kind of wake you up to something deeper happening. And it was, but having gone through it, it's one of those things that you go, I don't wish this upon anybody, but I can't really say that because it's what got me to where I am. Like you just said, right? Like, I don't really wish it on anybody. And I do want to help people not have to experience it to the degree that I did. But sometimes, God speaks your pain language as much as your love language. Like,
that's right.
Like here, I'm gonna be with you in this. I'm gonna tell you this is something to pay attention to. So, but it was the hardest thing to see the look in my wife's eyes of like, I don't know what else to do. Right?
I can only imagine.
Right. Yeah. Especially because she knew how passionate I was about what I was doing and how much I'd given to it. Right. So, I think to expand that a little bit more is to see then too people who didn't understand it, right? That wanted an answer to what was happening, but I couldn't give them one. Right. Which, is what drove me to have these conversations and say, to the research and pairing that with my experience. So
and how amazing that it's just so like our God. We think that these things happen to us. It's like, no, he's going before us. He's literally going before us. And the fact that you stepped into the role that wasn't the best fit for you at that school, it's amazing that they were able to, they basically created a role for you in this. And so what that tells me is that administrator also understood the need and probably didn't even know that she knew it until you said it. And it's like, oh yeah. That's when those aha moments really come to light, right?
Yeah.
So you also mentioned COVID and we're seeing this burnout on this end. Honestly, the entire workplace has changed over the past few years. What do you foresee, in terms of what does that look like going forward?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned the three sources of energy. The other two are ideals and rewards. So when you have ideals, rewards, and purpose, when those things all take a squeeze, people start feeling burnout. And really, when any one of them take a squeeze, you're going to start to feel it. But it's really heavy when it's all three.
So tell us about ideals. Right? Let's start with ideals.
Yeah. So ideals is, it's that hopes and dreams, the expectations that I have for how the world could and really should be. When we talk about ideals, it's coming typically from a place of our core convictions. That's centered on a lot of our identity that we, over the years, our values, our cultures that we've experienced, we're like, I'll adopt that, or I'll adapt that, or I'll reject that. And that eventually trickles down into this core conviction. And those core convictions, then we project our ideas and dreams into the world of, well, that's how it should be. This is how it should be.
And yet it's not.
Yeah.
So, when you, what can you really do when you're frustrated in your ideals? It feels like it's so out of your control.
Yeah, totally. Well, and especially when you're in a workplace that's like, hey, we have our values and vision on the wall. We seem so far away from that. Or I thought we were going to be doing this and we're not. Or I took this job because I thought we were going to make an impact here and it doesn't seem like we are. A couple of things that I've found have been helpful for me um, that I wish I would have known. One of them was I didn't celebrate small wins. I didn't celebrate the small wins that I was, hey, I believe in this ideal, this projection of how things should be. I was working really hard for them, but I put the work is way up top, and I'm working, and I'm not seeing the incremental successes. And because of that, not only am I not seeing that gap's closing at all, so then I'm frustrated and I get cynical. That's the symptom for when your ideals are frustrated.
Okay.
You start to get cynical, pessimistic. You start, blaming other people and inquiring why they're doing things the way they are. Really, when ideals get frustrated, you usually make a judgment on the system or the people in the system. And that gets you cynical when you start saying, well, things are never going to change. This is never going to work. Those kind of things.
Sure.
So what can you do about that? Well, you can start to celebrate the small wins and get somebody alongside of you that has a better perspective than you do in that moment. Hey, tell me what impact you've seen this thing make. Tell me about why you think this is worthwhile, right? Those kind of things. And you could start to just celebrate the small wins. The other thing that happens is when you celebrate the small wins, you start to see what is working. And so a lot of times when we wait for that big win to happen, we're like, look, it worked. We misperceived what got us there because we haven't been celebrating the small things along the way. And so we think, hey, we did this. Let's do that again. And it was like, no, it was all these little things that helped us get there.
Yes.
And so having somebody that has an unaltered perception, they don't have any skin in the game sometimes as much as you do, maybe, that can speak into it. And I had somebody like that in my last position, and I just wasn't listening to them. So, they would be like, well, no, we've done this and this, and I just didn't see it. So paying attention to those small wins and those people that are pointing out. The other thing that we can do is work towards trust. And this is probably true for each of the things that we feel that squeeze on and we start to lose our vitality. When we do that, it's not the opposite, but when we do the thing that the symptom we wish we would feel, when we start acting that way, it's amazing how much of a difference that can make. And it's just taking a step towards those things. So to take a step towards a better ideal being met and being fulfilled, you got to build a culture of trust around you. And so what are those small things you can do to say, I'm going to trust, or I'm going to trust this person, or I'm trust this thing, or this people always say, trust the process. That's actually probably helpful when it comes to vitality. Like, maybe I can trust something in here. I got to find something I can trust
it
and
takes
build trust
energy.
around that.
It takes energy to resist it, right? I mean, when you're in your head and you're resisting the process, then there's not a whole lot of good that comes from that. So if you can find those things to trust and just fully embrace and lean in. Great energy.
Well, and I get tunnel vision when I get cynical, right? I now see everything through the lens of it's not working. And so what used to be my list of shoulds and coulds has gone from 3 things to 30 things. And now everybody's offending those things, right? Versus I had 1 or 2 things and I'm working towards them.
Well, and then that's so natural, Jake, because our brains, want to support our thoughts. Like we want to be right. Our brains just innately want to be right. And so we look for the evidence to support our larger thought, and we can find all kind of evidence that may be real, may not be real.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's just the difference between I'm being curious versus I'm looking to prove somebody right or wrong, right?
Exactly.
I'm looking for answers. It's like you're the inquisitor versus no, I'm just a curious person about this. And just that little step.
Yes.
I'm going to be curious about this and discover. So you have ideals. The other one was rewards. Rewards is kind of one of those things that you hear a lot about with people who love HR and people who, I see a lot of it come through my feed sometimes. It's like, well, we got to reward people with this, and that. And we're all wired differently in all these things, right? Some of us put a higher priority on these different things. And that's true for rewards too. Some people want to see work-life harmony. Some people want to have a better salary. Some people are doing it for the benefits. Some people are doing it for, recognition. All those things, there's more than that, but all those things play into it. And you can have a person who's, you could have an organization that says mandatory overtime, and one person, that's a hit on their vitality, and another person, they're like, yes, I love it,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Because their reward priority was financial, but the other
Correct.
person was work-life harmony. And
Right.
that's one of the things I think is changing a lot right now. Is what used to be compensation used to be able to drive people and keep their vitality maybe a little higher. COVID caused people to go, I thought I prioritized money. Turns out I really
Interesting.
like this work-life balance. And
Right.
I like saying work-life harmony because it's, balance implies that it's equal, where harmony is like, no, it works together. This thing all works
Yes.
together. And
Yes.
so that I think you're going to see a lot more people, and it's already happening, that as soon as that harmony is disrupted, they're going to say, either they're going to start to burn out and lose vitality. And people quit all the time without quitting their job, right? Like there's people who just stopped showing up.
Don't they call
even
that
though they're
quiet?
still
They
there.
call there's a term for that, quiet quitting.
Well,
There actually
yeah,
is a social
right.
term now.
Yeah,
People, yeah, quiet quitting. Like
yeah,
you're there, but you're not there.
yeah. And that, and I think that's a little bit of that shift that did happen.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and no amount of pizza parties or gift
That's right.
cards or
Right.
raises are going to do anything to bring people's vitality up, right? I mean, they'll take the gift card, but it's not like it's doing anything to help them show up at their best and
So
to give
what
their
do you
best. It's something
foresee
that,
as the future? I mean, what do you think? How do you think that's going to play out?
yeah, I mean, especially as more and more younger leaders start being in charge of making some of those decisions, I think you are going to start to see organizations, and a lot already exist, that say, here's our compensation package, but here's our other package of work-life harmony with some other benefits that I honestly don't even know what they're going to be. Like that may not exist yet. Somebody's going to be creative and say,
Right.
hey, here's a way for us to not just reward you with some things you might like, but to give back to you, because everybody wants a return on their investment, even if you're doing it because you love it, even if you're doing it for, you have purpose. There has to be some level of like, well, is this worth it? Because that's the judgment you make, right? The
Right.
judgment is on the profession or the position you're in to say, is it worth it? What's interesting right now is the amount of people who are okay just stepping away. I think you're going to see more of the quiet quitting, less of the people jumping ship, because the reins are getting tired. Like, even though people want work-life harmony, there's a necessity and a reality of, well,
I was going to say, yeah, there is real life, got to pay the bills.
And so you might have companies, unfortunately, that don't make changes because they know they don't have to. And then I think you're going to see the other companies kind of, capitalism is good for this, where they go, hey, we're not leveraging this thing over here to get good productivity and efficiency out of people. Let's offer something different. And so you just might see a whole new group of organizations that do something that almost kind of unexpected with how they offer things.
And so that leads me to the question of, do you see corporate and churches in the same boat, or are they different? Same things apply, or not so much?
I think a lot still applies. One of the reasons my conviction is because we've, for the past 2 decades, 3 decades, taken so much, and I say we, meaning church leader type people, so many cues from the corporate world that it's hard to differentiate the practices. And so in some ways, I almost feel like the church is going to lag on this. They're going to be behind, where corporations and companies are going to make some changes, and churches will be like, oh, we should have been leading the way in that. We could have done that. And maybe there will be some that kind of open up their eyes. But again, when you have the stigma of some of the mental health stigma that's out there, some of the stigma of burnout as it relates to faith, it kind of makes me hesitant to think that the church is going to lead the way in that. But I know there's great people and people who listen to the Spirit that do lead churches that maybe will pay attention to it. Sometimes it just takes somebody to pay attention to it. It's not that they don't care. It's just that they're not aware. So if
you were, if someone said, hey, Jake, can you come to our organization? Can you come to our company? I mean, what would be some of the things that you would make suggestions to just to get started in terms, of whether leaders, influencers, just to increase the vitality of their organization?
So my biggest thing that I'm on this kick right now of trust. Do everything you can to build trust. And there's this Harvard professor named Frances Frey, Frei, Frey. I think that's how you say it. She's worked with like Uber and been in there, but she's at Harvard teaching leadership and organization. So I think she knows what she's talking about. But she talks about trust as like, and I'll just say this quickly, it's trust as in if you're authentic, if you have genuine empathy, and you have a rigorous logic, that those things really build trust. And so that's a really simple and compelling way for me that I'm like, anybody can start to do that today. How are you being authentic? Are you showing up as your true self? That might take some real like work to as a leader, might have to do some work. And then, are you being genuinely empathetic? And does your logic make sense? Have you done your homework? When people say, "Oh man, I got to listen to that person. They've really done their homework." You kind of want to lean into what they have to say,
right?
And when they say it in a compelling way or clear way, then we pay attention. So, do you have that logic? Do you have empathy? Do you have authenticity? I think any leader or influencer, anybody who's stepping into saying, "I want to create that culture here," that's a big place that you can today start to do things.
Well, clearly you've done your homework. That's why we're having this conversation today. So that's on an organization level. I mean, what about individuals? I mean, for someone yourself, someone who's looking at this saying, okay, well, I this all resonates with me, but what's my first step?
Yeah. I mean, it's really, you've already said the word, I've said it a ton of times, it's reflection. I don't think there's any greater practice for being able to step out of and find renewal if you have lost vitality, and to maintain and sustain vitality. Reflection, and I've learned more and more that reflection doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. It's very much where I live, and I go, oh, that's not where a lot of people live sometimes. And so, like, people hear journaling and they think, well, that's all about feelings. It's not just about feelings. It's about thoughts. It's about all of it. It's,
absolutely. And when we take it from our brain and we put it on paper, matter of fact, I encourage people when I'm coaching, like, do a thought download, take everything in your brain and put it on paper. You're going to be amazed at what you see there. And then you can make decisions about what you want to put back into your thought life and what you just need to eliminate. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Do a thought download. You don't have to call it journaling. Do a thought download, fine. But some sort of reflection, whether I encourage writing too, but however you're going to reflect to say, what that encounter that I had, say that it triggered you, whatever word you want to use, this encounter that I know I wasn't just tired, I wasn't just drained, because doing hard work is going to drain you. At the end of the day,
of course it is.
You work hard, you're going to be drained. But depleted, if you're feeling depleted, how do you know the difference? Well, you got to reflect. And so when you feel those feelings, name your feelings. That's what they teach the kids at school right now. Name your feeling. Okay, talk about that feeling. But then take it a little deeper and say, what happened that caused me to feel that way? And then why do I feel that feeling? And then all of a sudden there's some things that you can start to get to. And there's work that you can do with those, 3 areas, purpose and rewards and ideals. When you kind of start to understand where you're coming from as a person and an individual, it's going to be so much easier to have a conversation with a boss, with a colleague, with a coworker, to be candid and compassionate and say, man, hey, that day I blew up at you. Can I just tell you what was happening with me? I felt this, but here's why I felt it. And I really want to move forward in this way. But you have clarity on that. And you just say, well, that person's a beep, and I don't like them. They need to change. Well, then you're going to stay in that loss of vitality. You're going to just feel that constantly. But if you can, sometimes you don't even have to have the conversation. You could just have done the work and go, I know why I acted that way. I know why they acted that way. And here's how I want to handle it different next time. but I don't
Well,
have to call it
I
out.
love this because I mean, what you're describing, and people who have been listening to my podcast have heard me talk about this. I mean, my coaching model, we call it, CTFAR: circumstance, thought, feeling, action, result. And so circumstances are immovable. They just are what they are. And so
Mm-hmm.
we even put other people in the category of circumstance. We can't change a circumstance. We can't change other people. What we think
Right.
about it is what sets everything else in motion, right? And so when
Yeah.
you're having those feelings, the very first thing you have to do, whatever word you want to use at this point, it's semantics, reflection, thoughts, etc. Go back to that thought and figure out what is it you're thinking, because it's your thought that's causing you to feel that way. And if it means you're going to have to change somebody else, you better find a new thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because guess
Right.
what? That doesn't work.
Totally. And I think that's something that I learned maybe the hard way in some ways, was like, I began to understand that there are things that I thought I valued, but then after I really did the work, I went, oh, do I really care about that much? That I need to let it get this big? That I need to let it interfere with my work relationships or keep me in this place? And it was like, no, I don't. Well, heck, where did that come from again? Oh, it came from over here. I just started believing it because somebody told me I should believe that. Right.
And or you believed it for so long. And we don't question those. I mean, it's those neural pathways that create that, that belief pattern, and we don't ever stop to question it. So good for you. You stop to question it, and then it's like, wait a minute. Isn't it remarkable? Right. It's remarkable when you really take time to examine those things.
For sure.
So what question haven't I asked you today that you would like to leave our audience with? Is there anything? We've covered a lot of ground. This is awesome.
We did cover a lot of ground. I guess that's a good question to ask. What question haven't you asked? That's really good. I guess I would say, what about self-care? So like, where does self-care come in? And because I don't want to dismiss self-care. And so please, when I'm talking, don't hear like, hey, it doesn't matter if I get good sleep. No, it absolutely matters if you get good sleep. And where self-care, I think, does really come in is especially when you start to feel a loss of vitality, don't neglect that self-care stuff, because that's the first temptation, right? I'm going to go escape into this, or I'm going to, do the relational work that you need to do the spiritual work you need to do, make sure you're working on your finances still, do all the things that are good for your well-being, but also know you're not going to self-care your way out of it, right? It needs to be there, and it's going to help create margin if you do discover and work on the ways. And everybody's wired different. It's amazing what a good night's sleep and a good meal can do for me.
Sure.
And a good, a good sunny day, doing a good walk. Those things.
Yep.
I mean, if I do those things every day, I'm in actually pretty good shape. So, don't neglect those things, but don't expect too much of those things either.
Yeah. I think it was John Ortberg that said, sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, because if you're coming from a place of empty, you have nothing to really pour into your work of working on yourself. I mean, you have to have the baseline taken care of first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been amazing, and I just want our audience to know, anyone who watches on YouTube, you'll see I'm holding up Jake's book called Just 12. That is an entirely different topic. I'm going to have Jake back at some point, and possibly even with his co-author, and we're going to talk about that. But if you want to just give a synopsis, so if people want to pre-read and then hear you speak on it later, we can end with that.
Yeah, I mean, the way I like talking about it now is, Jesus had a mandate. He said, go and make disciples. Don't exclude people from that. All nations, you're supposed to include everybody. And he had this mantra. I call it a mantra. That's not what Jesus called it, but he said, love people like I've loved them, right? He adds on to that whole love others like I have. And he had a model that frankly feels like we've kind of lost, which was a narrowed relational focus. He focused on 12. Yes, he had 72. He had all the other people in his life, but he really narrowed his focus on 12. And so we take those things. What does it look like for us to prioritize 12 people? Maybe it's 13, maybe it's 7. 12 is the number that Jesus kind of has in front of us, but it's not always easy to do. But that narrowed relational focus, and just love those people that we've kind of selected and said, I'm going to love them like Jesus did. I'm going to love other people too. I'm going to do all those things, but I'm going to just relationally focus on them and prioritize
it's the intentionality then, right? It's because sometimes we can just, we just can assume things about our relationships, or for lack of better words, just take them for granted and not pour that intentionality into it.
Yeah. And so, as I do it, I find it challenges me all the time to kind of get back to like, oh, that's right, Jesus, like this is kind of what Jesus did, as opposed to like, and for me, I tend to think grandiose, right? I want to see big things happen,
right?
And it's kind of like, well, if we each did this thing like Jesus modeled, big things would happen, and we'd all get to be a part of it, not just a few. So,
that
we're excited to see what it's done for a lot of people.
That 100-mile journey starts with one step, so big things happen by taking those little steps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jake, it has been an absolute pleasure. I know our audience is absolutely going to have, let me ask you this. If anyone wants to reach out to you, wants to reach you and discuss this further in some way, what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, I was thinking about the best way earlier. I was like, well, I think the best way that I'll have the most luck of not getting lost in all the other things that come my way is if you can email just12.jake@gmail. That's the easiest one. just12.jake@gmail.com.
And that would be 12 is the number 12, not the word 12. Is that right? Or
yes. Oh, yes. just12.jake@gmail. Yeah, that's a good catch there. Yep.
Only because I mess those things up all the time. So, all right, my friend. Well, thank you so much. And we look forward to having you on again to talk about Just 12.
Awesome. Thank you, Jani. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye now.